Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some hot honey chicken quinoa bowls, a kind of a cinnamon roll scone, and then we're going to prep up our sourdough, some sourdough for tonight because I'm going to make a bunch of mini bowls, so like mini little sourdough loaves with lots of different inclusions. So let's start. We're going to get our sweet potatoes peeled and in the oven. And then we'll start working on our scones, prepping our quinoa, and then making our kind of our hot honey base for it. So I'm just gonna do, peel with my knife, take off this outer bit of our sweet potato here, and then we'll slice it up. And I'm gonna do like a honey lime, kind of a honey garlic lime sweet potato that will, I think, pair really well with the hot honey chicken that we're going to do. Though I'm going to kind of make the hot honey chicken a little bit more mild by cutting some of the honey the hot honey with some regular honey. Because if you've ever had hot honey, it is hot. It is spicy. Okay. Let's get that one. Let's get the other one down. Again, I find peeling sweet potatoes with my chef knife is much easier than trying to get a peeler. You can get all of that kind of drier white part of the sweet potato off, which is not as nice in texture or flavor. And it works well because sweet potatoes they're not very uniform. There we go. And just take off that last. And then we're just going to chop these up, kind of cube them up, and then we'll pop them in the oven to roast for our little quinoa bowls. Here we go. I always find that when you cook up sweet potatoes, they're really tender, but when you're chopping them up, they're such a firm and hard veggie. It's just interesting how they're much firmer than a regular potato, but they get more tender than, the traditional potatoes. Here we go. So I've got our sweet potatoes. I'm just trying to make sure they're all kind of the same size so they kind of cook up at the same time. And we're doing hot honey today because I don't think my kids would be able to handle hot honey. So I think it will be a good one to do with lunchtime for it. We're going to do a quick little drizzle of olive oil. We don't have a lot of sweet potatoes in here, so maybe like a teaspoon. And then I'm just going to use plain honey on this, not hot honey, because we're going to let the chicken kind of do all of that spice to it. Just a little drizzle, probably like a teaspoon. You don't need a whole lot. And then a little bit of garlic salt. And then we're going to add in some lime juice. And we're going to use our fresh lime juice. So good squeeze of a half a lime over this. And then I'm just going to kind of coat them all up. And we'll spread it out. And then we're going to pop these in the oven to kind of roast up. So I'm going to go wash my hands real quick. And we're going to go pop this in the oven. I have my oven at 400 because that's what we're going to cook our cinnamon roll scones at. So we're just going to pop it in, and then when we put our scones in, we'll just drop it down. But sweet potatoes are going to be the thing that takes the longest here. Okay, so we've got those in. I'm not going to set the timer because we'll just reset it when we put the scones in. So let's start with our base of our scones. We are going to do our dry part first, and then the wet. But while we're waiting for it, I'm actually going to pour my water in right now for our quinoa, and we're going to get it boiling. So I've got 2 cups of water. I'm going to bring my back burner up high because we've got a cup of tri-colored quinoa. Let's grab our flour while we're over here. So we're going to do 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So I've got 1 and 2. And then we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Good thing I read it because I grabbed baking soda and that would make my scones go crazy. You know, you just kind of naturally grab one. They are different colors though. Baking powder, not baking soda. So 2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1, 2. And then we're going to use a half a teaspoon of salt. And then we're going to get our sugar. We're going to use 1/4 cup of white sugar and 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Because when you have cinnamon rolls at home, you always make your like brown sugar kind of swirl in it. So I didn't want to do all brown sugar for this because I didn't want it to be too rich. So we're going to do half white and half brown sugar. Plus brown sugar is a bit more moist than regular sugar because of the molasses. And it can kind of mess with your crumb a little bit on your scone. So 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, and then we'll do 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And I'm just going to press it in firmly. And then we're going to just mix this up, and then we're going to cut our butter into it. So I'm just going to use my pastry cutter here to mix it up. You don't need to get out any other fancy thing. I'm just going to use it to break up the kind of bigger chunks of the brown sugar. And then we're going to mix it until everything is kind of fully dispersed. There we go. Oh, and I want to add in my cinnamon now too. We're going to add in a teaspoon, kind of like a heaping teaspoon of cinnamon. I just got to get it. When you have these like big containers and you get down to the very bottom of it, makes it a lot. Let's whisk that cinnamon in here. We're also going to be adding in more cinnamon in different parts of it, but we're going to add just a little bit of our cinnamon in the kind of the base. And then we do our press and folds. I'm going to sprinkle cinnamon between it to kind of give it a little bit of a swirl look on it. Okay. Now we're going to cut in a stick of cold butter. So you want to make sure it's nice and cold so that you can cut it into your flour mixture. And that's going to give you the nice kind of layers in your scone, that nice crumb. I always like to first cut it up. You know, I take my butter, cut it up into 4s and make little cubes. That just makes it easier for the pastry cutter when I'm doing it to cut into it smaller, because we want to make it to where our pieces are about the size of, you know, no bigger than a pea. Let's get this. So I just makes it a little bit easier. You could always use a food processor if you wanted to kind of cut up your butter, but I find that it's takes a little bit of extra, you know, work, because then you got to lug out your food processor, wash it and whatnot. But we cut our butter in. That's going to be for our cinnamon roll scones. My water is boiling right here for our quinoa, which we'll then have with our hot honey chicken quinoa bowls. So now that it's up to a nice boil, I'm going to put in a cup of my quinoa here. And we're going to put in a little bit of salt, about 1/2 teaspoon. And then we're going to let it boil here for just a few minutes, about 5 minutes. And then we'll turn it down to low and let it kind of simmer for that. And then we'll fluff it at the very end. We'll give it a stir and let it kind of boil here for a second. While that's boiling, I'm going to use my pastry cutters in here, and we're going to cut our butter into our flour and sugar mixture. There we go. And again, we don't want any pieces that are bigger than a pea. And it doesn't take too much, elbow grease to get this done. So I'll go through. Now, if you're making a really large batch, then you might want to, do it in a food processor, because then you could get pretty tired by the end. There we go. Looks like this is at a good rolling boil here. So I'm going to turn it down. You want to make sure it gets to this good boil. And then we're going to put our lid on. We're just going to let it kind of sit there, cook on there. And then after about a few minutes, I'm going to actually turn it off to let it like fluff up to get that nice fluffy quinoa. Here we go. So I always like to kind of push it out through here. Do I have it turned? Yeah, I got it turned down as low. I'm going to slide it halfway off my burner so it gets a little less heat. And we're going to cut it. You want to make sure for the, again, we use cold butter. If you use room temperature butter, what's going to happen is you're going to turn your scone more into a cookie than a nice kind of fluffy hybrid biscuit cookie mixture, because that's what a scone is. It's really a mixture between a biscuit and a cookie. Okay, we've got this just about cut up. So you can see it doesn't really take that long to kind of cut this in. I'm just going to take any butter that gets stuck out of here. And again, no pieces of butter really bigger than the size of a pea, or what happens is you kind of get a butter packet in there, which isn't really the worst thing in the world. Okay, we've got our dry mixture done. Let's make our wet mixture. We are going to add one egg. Pop this over here. And then a half a cup of sourdough starter. It can be active or just your discard. So it doesn't matter really here. We're not using it for the leavening, more of just a way to use it. So I'm going to add in my half a cup. There we go. I'll put it in here. And then we're going to add in a tablespoon of vanilla extract and 2 tablespoons of cream. Here we go. Make sure we leave none of it to waste. So a tablespoon of vanilla extract. That's going to give this a lovely, nice vanilla-y flavor. We're also going to make a vanilla glaze to kind of go off of, think about like, cinnamon rolls and their frosting. So 1 whole tablespoon of vanilla, and then 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. 1, 2. And then I'm going to use my fork here. We're going to just mix it up until they're all kind of combined. I'm going to pop my egg yolk, and then we'll add this into our dry mixtures, and then we're going to do kind of our press and folds for our scones. Yep. Well, I just want to make sure that egg gets all the way mixed up and everything kind of gets incorporated. The vanilla is giving it kind of this like rich light brown color to it. So we'll add just so much flavor. Here we go. Perfect. So now we've got our wet mixture, and we're going to just pour it right into our dry mixture here. And just make sure I get it all out. And then as we mix this is going to form a dry shag. I'm just going to use a dough whisk to mix it, but you could also use a fork. And we're going to just kind of incorporate it together until we have this shag form. And then we're going to put it out on our counter, and we're going to do our press and folds to have it kind of form into our little pucks. Here we go. So here's our dry shag, and trust me, when we start doing our press and folds, this will all come together. The trick is you don't want to knead this dough. You want to press and fold it. So I'm going to dump it out on my counter here. And we're going to do essentially our presses. So I'm going to press first. And every press and kind of fold over is going to create a layer. And I said I was going to sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon between kind of my layers that I fold up. So we've got just a light dusting. And then I'm going to fold this kind of layer on top of it. And it's going to be crumbly in the very beginning because we're kind of starting the press and folds. But as we work that butter in, we're going to get more of a disc shape or a mound. Sprinkle again, just a light dusting of cinnamon over. There we go. This is going to give you just kind of a little bit of a marbled effect inside our scone here. So you see how it's slowly coming together now? But don't knead. Kneading is the one thing that's going to give you a rock hard scone instead of a nice, delicious, fluffy scone. We're going to make 2 pucks now. So I'm just going to kind of press and fold a couple more times with each puck. Because I like to do mini scones versus like just a set of 8 big scones. There we go. Just take any dry bits again, and you're going to press it to about a thickness of about around an inch or so. Doesn't need to be too squished down, but you don't want to also make it a mountain. There we go. And again, just take any crumbles that and just place them right on top. And that way you can press them in well. Here we go. So I've got kind of my 2 pucks forming about an inch high. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash now. And then let me grab a baking sheet out because we're going to bake this. And then on some parchment paper. And it's really key, I find, for scones, put that parchment paper down because it really helps that from sticking, and it's been a really easy cleanup. So I've got our parchment paper down. And again, if you haven't made the switch to parchment paper, it's amazing. And then I'm just going to take this, and this is a pastry cutter, and I'm just going to slide it under so that I can pick up my disc and put it on my parchment paper here. I'm going to do the same over here. There we go. And I'll just move this all out of the way so I can put this here. And now I'm going to cut each one of my little pucks into 8 pieces. So we'll kind of cut it in half. Now you could always make 1 big disc and then make 8 big scones, but I do find that the little scones cook up just a smidge nicer. They don't get too hard, and you still get that nice soft one because you don't have to cook it quite as long. So we'll stretch it out. That way it can have space to bake in between it. And any little crumbles, you can just place those right on top. We will brush these with a little bit of cream that helps give them a golden brown. And then I'm also going to put a little cinnamon sugar over the top. Okay. And I guess you could do them in any shape. I just always do them in this little like ray because that's just how I always had scones growing up. Now let's get a small little bowl. And you don't even need that much cream for this, like a tablespoon max. So we're just going to put a little bit in the bowl. And then I'm going to get a little basting brush, and we're going to just dab the top of it with our cream, and then we'll sprinkle our cinnamon sugar over. And then this can pop in the oven. So just a little dab. This is going to help give a nice kind of golden brown crust to it. It will help the sugar also kind of dissolve and give you this nice little cinnamon sugar crunch on it. Here we go. And if you want a shinier scone, you could do like an egg wash and brush it over with an egg wash. But I find the cream, we're already using it in our recipe, so it's kind of just easier to use. So you don't have to waste another egg. Here we go. Okay. And then we're going to use a little bit of cinnamon sugar. We eat a lot of cinnamon sugar toast here. So I've got a little shaker full of cinnamon sugar that we're just going to sprinkle over the top. So you could also just do plain sugar, but the cinnamon is just going to give you a little extra kind of pop of flavor. And you don't need a whole lot. And now we're going to go pop these in the oven at 400 degrees. And these are going to cook for 18 minutes. And that's what I love about the little ones. The bigger ones, you have to cook longer, but then what happens is they get more crunchy and they dry out a little bit. We're going to move our sweet potatoes down below. We'll put our scones right up on top. Beautiful. And I'll set my timer here for 18 minutes. And those sweet potatoes should be done right around that time as well. With them being underneath the scones, they're going to get a little less heat, so it's not as direct, which means they'll take a little bit longer to cook. Okay, got our quinoa going. Let's get our chicken chopped up and starting to saute. And then we're going to make our marinade for this, or our sauce for it. So I've got 2 big chicken breasts here. I'm going to trim off any fat so that I don't have any rubbery bits in my dish. And I always say with chicken, the chicken fat is never really great. It's not like, a steak where it can add a lot of flavor. So trim it off because it's just going to be like rubber. Okay. And then I'm going to fillet them in half so that when I cut them into kind of strips, they're not super fat strips. Here we go. And always, if you cut against the grain, you're going to have a more tender chicken because you're breaking up those kind of fibers in there, the muscle fibers, and it just makes it more juicy and flavorful. Here we go. So we're not doing super huge chicken pieces. Think about like a bowl. So you just want them to be about bite size. There we go. And then I'm just going to make them a little bit smaller. Pop it in here. And you could also use chicken thighs. Chicken thighs have a bit more fat in them, so there'll be a more tender, more juicy, like little bite of chicken. But and it's also chicken thighs. A lot of times that's a little bit cheaper than chicken breasts. Here. And okay, let's get rid of our yucky parts. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. Okay. And now I'm going to get some tongs out. I'm going to start heating up some oil. And then we're just going to dust our chicken with a little bit of garlic, salt, and pepper to start with, because it's going to be in a sauce, like a hot honey sauce. So we don't need too much seasoning on it to begin with. So I'm going to turn my oil up. I put in about 1.5 tablespoons because I do have a big pan here. I'm going to grab my pepper over here. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of pepper over this. About, I want to say maybe 1/2 teaspoon, so not too much. And we're going to do our garlic salt. There we go. Probably like maybe close to 1 teaspoon. And then I'm going to squeeze a little bit of lime juice over this as well. That the acidity of that lime juice is going to help just keep that chicken nice and juicy. We'll be using some more lime juice in our sauce, but I was like, oh, we'll put this in here. That will just make that chicken extra juicy because the acidity of the lime juice is going to kind of break down the fat in the chicken, which will make it more juicy. Just give this a quick kind of toss and the spices. And then once this is kind of nice and hot, we are going to start sauteing it off. Okay. I'm going to pop this right over here. That way it'll be waiting for me. Got pepper on my hand, so I'm going to give it a wash. And once this is kind of, it shouldn't take too long for this to heat up. But while we're waiting, let's cut up our sweet peppers. We're going to have some sweet peppers in there as well as some snap peas. And then, of course, our sweet potatoes. So those like 3 vegetables will kind of all work together in our bowl with the quinoa and then our little hot honey chicken. So take off our tops. Let's kind of de-seed them. And then we're also going to make our vanilla glaze for our scones when they pop out. I was thinking about, I was deciding, oh, should I do like a cream cheese glaze on there? And I opted. I was like, no, we'll just keep it simple, vanilla. Because I'm like the only one in my family, but I love cinnamon rolls with cream cheese frosting. Now, at Thanksgiving, I'll make 2 kind of types of frosting because my siblings and I all love cream cheese frosting, but none of my kids or my husband like cream cheese frosting, except they all said the cream cheese frosting on the banana bars I made earlier this week was delicious. So I just think they just like to say they don't. Okay. We've got some nice heat coming up. I'll do my drip test. And if it sizzles right away, we're good to put the chicken in. Needs a little bit longer. It wasn't quite a quick sizzle. Well, it's sizzling now. We should be good then. Okay, we're going to put our chicken in and we're going to cook it off and then we'll remove it from the pan. Just don't crowd your chicken as it's cooking. That way it can get a nice sear on every piece versus it sweating out all of its natural juices and not getting this good sear on it. So we used our just simple lime juice, garlic salt, and black pepper for this. But we're going to add a lot more flavor in our our sauce that we'll make in the pan after this. Let's just slide and try to get. And the trick is you can fill your pan up. Just try to make sure that there's a little bit of space between each chicken and it's all got an area on the bottom of your pan so it gets that direct heat, because that's what's going to give you that nice sear on it. I'm hoping that we can get it all in here. I grabbed my 12-inch Hex-Clad pan for this because I always like to try to make it in one pan. And I feel like that's one thing that people think, oh, it doesn't make a difference. I'll just throw all my meat in and saute. And I said, it does make a difference in the fact that you're not going to have quite the right texture of your meat if you throw it all in at one time. Or, and you can also, your meat will get a little bit more dry. Okay, so we're going to let that saute there. I'm going to cut up our peppers here. I'm going to do kind of a bigger chop on them because I do want them to kind of be one of those nice, like, crunchy little flavorful vegetable in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to saute. We'll do a quick saute on these. We'll make our sauce, and then we'll add our snap peas in, kind of cook in the sauce with the flavor there. But I do want my peppers to get a little bit of a sear on them. Okay, let's get rid of these seeds. And then this is going to use a good amount of lime juice. So I've got 1.5 limes for our remaining part of this. Let me grab a bowl here. So we can use this for what we had our kind of our water cooking in it. We're gonna need a 4th cup of our soy sauce. So this is probably gonna be the rest of this bottle. Yep, perfect. So a 4th cup of soy sauce. And then we need about 2 tablespoons of fresh lime juice. And you've got to use fresh. The bottled lime juice just doesn't have the same flavors. And depending on how juicy your lime is, it could be 1 to 1.5. This one is a very juicy one. So there we go. Get our next one. Good. I'm going to check. I think my chicken is about ready to flip over here now. Look at that, beautiful. We're getting this nice kind of sear on the side. And I just kind of wait until I see that pink, a little bit of that pink left, and then I'll know it will have this good sear on it. There we go. Kind of rotate. I want to just get them all flipped over, get this good cooking. And the trick is you also don't want to overcook your chicken because then you're going to have a more rubbery chicken. So just do your high temperature and cook it until we've got this good sear on both sides. And then we're going to remove it from the pan. And that's kind of a crucial step because if you leave it in the pan, you're going to overcook it and then it won't be as yummy. I'm going to grab a little bowl for this. Big one. Okay, let's get our last little lime in here. Here. Okay, and then we're going to add in about a heaping tablespoon of garlic, which is going to be about the rest of my garlic. Here we go. And then because I don't want mine to be super hot and spicy, I'm only going to use 1/4 cup of this honey, and then I'm going to cut it with 1/4 cup of regular honey. But before we do that, I'm going to give my chicken a quick toss here. And I think it is cooked and ready to transfer out. And now we'll move it here. This does continue to cook, so as it's still hot. So again, it's really important not to overcook your chicken because it's going to continue to cook here, and then we'll be throwing it back into the sauce, which means it's going to cook a little bit more then. Okay. Beautiful. So we've got our sauteed chicken up for this. I'm going to throw my sweet peppers into my pan. We're going to cook it in those nice kind of crispy juices. I'm going to bring my heat to about a 4, so not super high, not as high as what I was cooking the chicken on. We're just going to let this have a quick saute on there, and then we're going to kind of do our marinade. So 1/4 cup of our hot honey. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball this. Now, hot honey is honey that's been infused with chilies. So it's got a kick of a heat. That's why I like to kind of cut it so that it's not so spicy. And then I want 1/4 of a cup of our regular honey. We're going to give this a good mix to kind of try to dilute that honey so it's everywhere. And then we're going to add it into our pan and we're going to let it simmer. There we go. Okay, pretty simple. Now we can add in, because we've got this good kind of quick little char on our peppers, just enough to get a little thing. I'm going to add this in, and then we're going to kind of try to deglaze the bottom of our pan. And we've got to let this simmer and come to a boil because we want it to get to a nice sticky texture. So I'm going to first kind of scrape off any of those chicken bits that are on the bottom of our pan. There we go. And then we're going to let it kind of simmer first, and then we'll add in our snap peas to kind of cook in it. But we're going to just wait just a few while it's getting nice and hot, because if I add those in, it's going to take a lot longer to bring it up to the temperature. Okay, I've got almost all of those little chicken bits off the bottom of our thing. And now I've got it on, I'm going to do it on a 4, and we're just going to let it simmer, kind of bring a boil. You got to keep an eye on it because it can bubble up pretty fast. So if you got to turn it down a little bit, you want it to evaporate out some of the liquids, but you don't want it to, of course, spill over everywhere. Let's make our glaze for our things. I'm going to grab my powdered sugar, cream, and vanilla. So we're going to add in we're going to start with a tablespoon of heavy cream. And then I'm going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we're going to start with a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. I just go a little bit of sugar at a time until I get the consistency, but we'll probably end up using around a cup. But start with a little bit first so it's easier to mix. Liquid takes a lot more than our powdered sugar dissolves really quickly. I'm going to turn off our quinoa, and we're going to fluff it here in just a second. There we go. So this is so far with a 1/2 cup of powdered sugar in, and you can see how much it's already kind of dissolved down. Now we want a nice enough glaze that will drizzle. I'm probably going to add just a teensy bit more cream in here because I'm looking for the color that I want. I want it to be a little bit more pale. So I'm going to add maybe another tablespoon of cream. Let's mix it up, and then we'll add enough powdered sugar to get the consistency of Elmer's glue. A nice enough drizzle over. I don't want it too thick. I don't want it like frosting, but a nice kind of glaze. So finish with the other kind of 1/2 of the cup. There we go. And then I just use a fork, or you could use one of those little whisks to kind of get it mixed up. There we go. And this will have this really subtle vanilla flavor to it, which I think will pop really well with the cinnamon in our scones. And then I'm going to drizzle this over, and then I'll sprinkle a little bit of our cinnamon sugar on top of it. So again, you're just going to get hit with another bit of cinnamon fur. But here we've got this nice kind of viscosity of it where it is kind of like Elmer's glue. It's not too thick or too thin. Beautiful. Put this over here. Let's check on this. We've got this nice kind of simmer coming through. I'm going to turn up to a 4 now. And then I'm going to add in my snap peas. And then I hear our oven is calling us. So I've just got a bag of our snap peas. We're going to toss this, and then we're going to go get those out of the oven. We're going to, again, let this simmer, let it kind of thicken up. And I'll grab a trivet. Should probably grab two. Let me turn this off or it's going to beep at us. Look at our beautiful cinnamon scones with our cinnamon crust on it. And I'm also going to grab out our honey lime sweet potatoes. But I love how, like, on some of these, I'll show you the layers that you get on it, and they are popping, and that's from the press and fold. You get those layers through that press and fold, and there. So this one, just right here, you can just see the layers on it. All of those it's going to be fluffy, delicious, light, but still soft on the inside, but you get that nice kind of crunch on the outside. We're going to let them cool for just a second, and then we're going to drizzle with our glaze. We want to let it cool down for not too long, but enough. You want them still hot, but you don't want them piping hot because then it will completely melt away.
You have a question. How many are you cooking for?
So for our lunch, it's kind of just we're cooking for about 4 for our lunch. And now when my kids get home from school, everybody will have the scones, but it's small because my kids are at school, which is nice, especially now that summer is over. While we're waiting for our sauce to kind of thicken up right here, I'm going to prep up my sourdough for tonight. So tonight I'm going to shape up some mini bowls. I'm going to do inclusions in them. So I'm deciding whether I'm going to do 6 or 8 of the mini ones, but I'm going to do a different flavor for each one. Okay. This is my basic recipe. So I'm going to do my big loaf, and let me grab my second jar of starter since we already used some. I woke up early this morning and fed it at like 6 a.m. I have to get my daughter up early. Fed it before I worked out, and so it'd be nice and ready. You know your starter is ready when it's doubled in size and it's nice and bubbly. So you see how we've got all of those bubbles there? We are going to add in 150 grams of active starter. So it needs to be fed, between 4 and 8 hours beforehand. There we go. Almost. Perfect. So 150 grams of our active starter and 565 grams of water. And warm water. You want warm water. So I had it filled up with warm water before we started. You don't want it scalding hot because you don't want to kill the bacteria that kind of creates the fermentation process and the rising. But when it's warm, it's going to incorporate into the flour much easier and hydrate it. So 565 on the nose. Okay, we're going to give this a good thing. But before I give it a stir, I'm going to toss this. You can see our snap peas are starting to get nice and bright and green, which means they're getting tender and soft. They're, of course, in this kind of lovely honey sauce on here, which will have a little bit of heat, but that lime will also cut through it. I'm going to grab my fork out. The trick to fluffy quinoa, and I've turned it off now, is to fluff it with a fork. So you just kind of pick it up and you just let it kind of sit there and fluff up. Beautiful. So perfect. Quinoa is really easy to cook. Let's dissolve this into our water here. And then we're going to add in about a tablespoon of salt, or like close to 15 grams. Grab my salt over here. I do just kind of 3 big scoops. The salt, you can cut it down if you want to. You don't have to add as much, but I feel like it's kind of the perfect amount. This is going to make a good size amount of bread. And then, let's give this a thing. We're going to let that sit for a second. Okay. I'm going to add in my chicken now. We're going to let it simmer with the chicken in here for a few minutes. That way that flavor can seep in to our chicken. Turn it down. Look at that. Looking delicious. Okay, we'll let that simmer there. Let's drizzle our scones because now they've kind of cooled down just a smidge and they're not super hot. I'm gonna slide the tray over here a little bit closer. I've got my nice kind of glaze here, and we're gonna drizzle it over our tops of our scones. And the heat of the scone is gonna cause it to continue to like melt down. And then we're gonna sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon sugar on the top of this just to kind of complete that cinnamon roll flavor. So lots of cinnamon. We have cinnamon in our batter, then we did layers of cinnamon. We put cinnamon sugar on the top, and then we're going to sprinkle more. Here we go. And I will say, when doing it while it's hot, it kind of helps melt it in and kind of crisp it up. So it makes it to where it like sticks on well. Okay. Beautiful. You can see how just about a cup of powdered sugar really gives you the right amount. I'm going to turn mine off. We've got a nice little simmer over there. And then just a little shake of cinnamon sugar over the top of them, which will give a little extra little cinnamon flavor on top. And voila, we've got our cinnamon roll scones that we use as a half a cup of our sourdough discard. Just has lots of lovely flavors. Okay, let's finish up our loaf of bread, and then this should be cooled down and ready to serve. I need to get 750 grams of bread flour. So you want unbleached bread flour on here. So it's like the lovely thing about our dish right here, it's like causing off. I've turned it off, but it's still simmering out, which is wonderful. It's going to add so much flavor. Ugh. Let me grab my bag of bread flour. Okay. We want 750 grams of unbleached bread flour. So we're going to add in, I'm just going to pour it in here. So we're at about 550 right now. There's going to be like the perfect amount in this bag, I think. Perfect. I have like a tablespoon left. And then we're just going to mix this in. And then all we have to do is after like our first 20, 30 minutes, we do our first round of stretch and folds, which we'll do 4 rounds of them. And then you just let it sit on your counter and you kind of let it do, like a proofing. And then later tonight, I will laminate it, put our inclusions in. I'm still deciding all the different flavors that we'll do. And then I put it in the fridge and let it sit overnight. And then tomorrow at dinner time, we'll be ready to bake them up. Here we go. So really easy sourdough. Once you've got your starter made, it's really easy to do. I do have lots of videos and recipe cards out for everybody on how to make your own starter. It does take about a week. It's about a week-long journey, but after that, you'll be making delicious bread. But now we are ready to serve up our lunch. So I'm going to slide my scones just out of the way over here because I think I'll symbol everything right here. It'll be easier. Let me grab a bowl. And I'm going to grab a spatula for our things here. And I'll grab. There we go. So we got to get everything in here to put our components together. Whoop. Of course, it wants to catch on me because I have too many utensils. We're going to slide up. We've got our kind of honey things. They'll have this nice kind of crunchy candy bottom to them from that honey that kind of caramelized up. Okay, we're going to add on our quinoa. So this is just a basic tri-color quinoa that we just cooked with a little bit of water and salt because we're going to be adding so much flavor with our our veggies and our sauce on here. Then we've got our honey lime sweet potatoes that will have this nice kind of candied edge on it from the honey. And then our hot honey chicken. So we've got chicken breasts that we seared off, and then we've got our snap peas, sweet peppers, and let's now get a good scoop of this hot honey sauce. And we're going to drizzle it all over this. And this is made from hot honey, lime juice, garlic, and soy sauce. So it's going to have just a lot of flavor. And of course, you're going to pair it with our delicious cinnamon roll scones. So these are our sourdough scones made with cinnamon in the base of it and butter and of course flour, half brown sugar, half granulated sugar, and then topped with a vanilla glaze and some cinnamon sugar. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So our hot honey chicken bowls and cinnamon roll scones, and you can watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Hex-Clad pans, I've got all my sourdough equipment in there, my knives, spatulas, baking sheets, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in that shop if you're interested in what we use. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.